The following program is an IKB production, filmed and directed by Ivan K. Blau, for showing on Lowell Cable Television, on Channel 2, your public access station. The Lowell Area Historical Association presents A Night of Reminiscing.
This is just a fantastic turnout, and I'd like to thank everyone for showing up tonight. If you'd like a membership to the Lowell Historical Association, Marge Harding, you can speak with her afterwards. Welcome to tonight's program. I'd like to thank Marge Harding for organizing tonight's program. And I'd now like to introduce Norm Borgeson, who will be our moderator tonight.
I'm the moderator. I'm a moderate Republican, so that makes me the moderator. I have just a couple of remarks that I want to make before we start. One is that this is not intended to be a contest or a challenge, or I'm smarter than you are, or my memory's better than you are. Let's make it very, very friendly and peaceful and nice, not a contest of any kind. The first part of the program will be devoted exclusively to the members of the panel, and we'll listen to their remarks with bated breath, and in the last part of the program we will devote entirely to the audience to ask questions or present their memories of Lowell, things like that. So the audience will be the second part of the program. Third is, reluctantly, I'm going to use a timer. It's very difficult for me to tell my Aunt Ann, my 5th grade teacher, to stuff a sock in it, but somehow I've got to do it. And if the timer becomes offensive or intrusive or anything like that, we can just chuck it. It's not important. This is our first attempt at this type of thing. We'll be learning along with everyone else how to do it and what's right and what's wrong and whether it's any good or not any good. But I anticipate nice things. I think it'll be terrific. But so enough of that. And I'm going to just introduce each person individually. My 5th grade teacher and my Aunt Ann Borgerson.
You watch it.
My Uncle Ray Borgerson. Spent a few years here in Lowell. Watched me probably since day one, I would imagine, and
I think I probably started day one.
I bet you did. Yeah. I was born and raised in upstairs of well, it used to be my grandfather's grocery store. Did you ever work at the grocery store? Did you work at the grocery store? Yeah. Well, anyway, it used to be Man's World barber shop down there right near Hans Hardware. Now I live 2.5 blocks away, so I've come a long way in this world. Next is Harold Engelhire. The man always told me to put a little money in your savings account, Norman. You can't wait. It'll be good for you. And Mr. Runciman was the man who gave me my first dollar for a savings account, Harold. And
Still got it?
Yes.
What you guys think?
I should figure that out sometime. Yep. Ruby Christensen, who been here in Lowell forever, probably saved my life. One time I tipped over on a motorcycle on 28th Street going 85 miles an hour. My parents had told me, "Don't ride that motorcycle, Norman." Well, I did. I tipped over. Afraid to go to the doctor, went to Ruby. Ruby helped me, and she did. She gave me medicine and cleaning agents and things like that. Probably saved my life. A few days in bed, and I was okay. Bruce Walters, I remember him most as the operator of the Lowell Lumber Company, and the lumber baron. Yeah, the lumber baron of Lowell. In fact, I still got a pole. Ron Collins and I decided one day we're going to learn to be pole vaulters, so we went down to Bruce and got a pole to pole vault with. What it was, Bruce, I know you don't remember, it was one of those railings that you used along the stairs, to go out. It was about like pole vaulting with a telephone pole. Ron and I never became pole vaulters. His wife, Mrs. Walters, And Bob Hahn, the grocer of Lowell, as I remember him for many years, always running down to Hahn's grocery store at what's there now, Bob?
The carpet outfit.
The wall covering,
Carpet wall
yeah,
covering.
right on the corner. That's right. Yeah.
I was in there 20 years.
Yeah. And Dave Coons, who was with his father's clothing store at different times, and my parents, this Coons Clothing was a wonderful place for me. My parents were always gone. They said, just go down and charge it. So I did. They used to get annoyed about the size of the building. Anyway, that was, and of course, that's the same place where the savings company was for a long time. Now, what, Chapman Insurance, farm insurance is there now, yeah? Well, anyway, that's our introduction, and I guess probably the way we'll do it is just maybe, again, go in order a little bit. I'll start with Ann because she's on the end, and if she has any, she might, for example, tell us when she moved to Lowell. Maybe she's been on Lowell all her life. I honestly don't know. I do know, but I gotta pretend that I don't know.
Well, you want me to?
Yes,
He
yeah.
wants to interrupt me already.
Oh, does he? Yeah, I'll give it the bell.
We came to Lowell in 1912 because my father, I guess, did most of his business in Lowell. He was a farmer and came to the mill and so on. We had lived in Alto near
36, they built the school, which is still there, and that was under WPA rules and so forth. And at that time, they could hire a supervisor for the deal, but he could only work for 1 day. So at that time, Carpenter here was supervisor, and so they paid him a check every day he worked. So that was one of the...
John Taylor.
Huh? John Taylor, thank you. Got my old head missing that one. Thank you, Charlie. But by that time, we had a gym, and it was quite acceptable and a great improvement over what we did have. But we had no stage, no anything in there. And I remember the school teachers put on a play and sold tickets, and they made enough money to buy material to make a curtain across there. So that was the beginning of that. I knew every school teacher who was there, and probably most of the school kids, and nowadays it's grown so big that I know practically nobody. But times have changed so remarkably from what it was then to now. The Bob Hahn's grocery store probably didn't take out any more space than the checkout counter down to Family Fair now. Everything seems to be big now. Everything's big, the one. And of course, the first of the takeouts, you know, you go up to some place and you order a hamburger and you drive around and it's ready. Has that thing rung yet?
No.
Okay. So that was really quite a something. They do the same thing now. And believe it or not, they even do it for the new HQ Lumberyard, which is just brand new in Grand Rapids and opened up 6 days ago. I don't know. But the one thing about these takeouts, they always have their hand out for the money before you get the takeout, which is conversely what it was. And I remember when I started in the lumber company, and that was August 1st, 1939, and along with the lumberyard, I got Mrs. McCarty.
Yes, the nicest lady that ever lived.
You can say that much louder. She was great, but this was just marvelous on the thing, and oh yes, I did. I got married. After we were here, I proposed to Anita, and we got married. And I guess that's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. And some way or other, Walter Gumser was a deciding factor in quite a few of my decisions. First of all, he was the one that hired me to come to Lowell after I've been teaching there. So we started to Lowell. Secondly, he decided against me, and that was probably the biggest decision, because Nita and I got married, we didn't have a place to go, so we were thinking about renting Walter's upstairs. Well, he was a go-go guy, and he couldn't wait for us to middle around, so we rented it to Ray. And so we bought our house where we are today for $900.
Thanks, Bruce. This Wallace?
May I tell a love story? Yes. 5 years before I even saw Bruce, met Bruce, I was watching him work up in Symphony. He started down at the Symphony at 15, and I was going to the concert. In fact, we would go both Thursday night and Friday night because those were both good date nights. And I was watching Bruce progress each year, and finally in junior college I met him. But before that, 5 years before that, I was at a picnic at Fellisburg Park with my family and relatives. And we came into Lowell to see the show. That must have been the first meeting. It's one thing I can think of. And we drove in the convertible, so we wanted to be sure to see the whole show, but we parked in front of the house we had. And there were 10 feet of shore on our bank there then. It's all been washed out with boats. But cars could park in there, and that's where we did. We parked, my family. And I looked around and I thought, someday I fell in love with that spot. That's not the love story. And then when we came here to teach, before that, I got to tell you how I got my engagement. Mr. Siegel, I think it was it you were here? Bruce came into Grand Rapids to teachers convention in October, and we sat in back of Central High School picking up my diamond. He came in with a card of diamonds. That's the faith they had. We picked out a ring, and we picked out our wedding date 3 months later. And then we looked at Mr. Gunser's house, and I was born up over my folks' drugstore, and I had never lived downstairs. And I said, Bruce, please don't let me start out my married life upstairs again. I have never lived on the ground floor. So we came coasting down. I hadn't made a decision yet, and our car just stopped at our house. And, oh my goodness, here I am again, 5 years later. And there had to be an old wooden barrel stave that says for sale. See Mr. Hardy. And so, wasn't Hardy? Yeah. So then we saw that through, and Bruce told you about the price we paid for it. We peeked in the windows, we sat out in front, drew the design of the floor plan as much as we could tell. We drew the picture of the whole house, and I still have all of this in our file. But then we started in on the house. But my introduction to the school and the faculty was getting myself down to that gymnasium that Bruce told in the WPA building. And it had a metal strip on each step. And here I came, all gussied up to meet everybody in the school because I didn't know Lowell at all. And I was right down there. That was my introduction. That's how I came to.
What a nice story. Where did you come from?
Grand Rapids.
From Grand Rapids.
We were on this bookstore on Grand Rapids.
Right.
About 2 blocks from the city limits. It's now called Roosevelt Square, right across from Jurgens and Oakville. And the sign is still on the brick, 1913, and I was born 8 years later. So that's my name.
Nice story. Bob, can you top that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
I'm a little embarrassed to admit that my only claim to fame is old age. I was born June the 10th, 1899 in Burlington, Kansas. And the Lowell Rotary Club was formed here in Lowell in 1935. There were 17 charter members. I'm the only survivor. And this past summer, Bob Ann was instrumental in taking me back to Kansas again to a high school reunion. I graduated there in 1919 from Burlington High School, And I discovered when I went back that I'm the only survivor of the class of 1919. I'm saying my only claim to fame is old age. I'm going to tell you the story that I told at Rotary. Since I can't turn back the clock on time, why, I've decided to cast my lot with the King Solomon. Now, King Solomon lived to be 101. King Solomon had a throne, King Solomon had a runner, and King Solomon had a harem. King Solomon sat on the throne, said to the runner, said, "Bring me wife number 17. Off the runner would go down to the harem and back to wife number 17. After I say, "Bring me wife number 12. Off the runner would go and back to wife number 12. Then he'd say, "Well, bring me wife number 3. Off the runner going back to number 3. As I told you, King Solomon lived to be 101, and that runner died at the age of 29. The story is, it doesn't much to do with the puts you in an early grave, but it's to run around after. Little history myself. In 1916, I had a Sunday school teacher there in Burlington that had worked on a pleasure boat out of Detroit. I wanted to be a bit adventuresome, so I expressed a desire to him that I'd like to do something, and he told me that he'd get me a job on this boat that ran out of Detroit as a waiter, and that's how I came to Michigan the first time. Then I went back, that was in the summer of 16, so I went back to Kansas, and then I came back in 1917, 1918, 1919, and each time I returned home, except in 1919, I roomed with a fellow in Detroit there by the name of Delph Didier that had been to University of Michigan for a year and was going back again. He'd been away in the service back again. And he persuaded me to go over to University of Michigan. I said, "Well, Del," I said, "I haven't got any money." We only got $1 a day at that time. And a 5-cent tip was acceptable. You got a nickel tip, you did quite well. And so in 1919 then, no, 1920, yeah, 1919, wait a minute, I'm lost. At any rate, I went to the University of Michigan in 1919, yeah. And I met my wife over there, Thelma, on a blind date. She must have been blind or she wouldn't have dated me. And so after I finished, she finished a year ahead of me at the university. And after I finished, I came to Lowell. Her mother was a widow and lived here. Harold Engelhire can attest to this. He knows about the deal. And for a want of something to do, I had to go back to the University of Michigan for summer school to get a teacher's life certificate. And I never went back. But in the quest for something to do, I bought out a grocery store here by the name of a guy by the name of McFarland had it. And I was at the bottom of the totem pole as business goes here. There were 8 independent merchants at the time of groceries or meats, not groceries and meat, but grocery or meat. And so in 1923, when I went into business, believe it or not, clerk hire was $8 a week then. And you couldn't carry $5 worth of groceries out of the store. It was just that bulky, that big. You can't believe the prices that were prevalent then. So, but I stayed there in the store for 20 years. And at the end of the 20 years, Lester Weaver and I were the only 2 survivors. Lester was in the little sheet iron building there on the bridge, and I was in the corner of Monroe and Main Street there. And then I sold out in 1943 to my meat cutter, Carl Monroe. And then I went up to University of Water Products, was interested in that, and stayed there for the next 20 years. Yeah, the next 20 years up there. So I had just the 2 jobs. And you can't imagine the change that's taken place in the groceries and meats and whatnot in that span of time. I weathered the Depression and WPA was a big deal at that time. And all the first service that was put in Lowell was all hand done, by hand. And the employees on the WPA got 65 cents an hour. And that's how that came about. And Then, of course, in 1960, we sold out there, university, we sold out air control products at Coopersville. And since I became an employee rather than an employer, I resigned from Rotary. And eventually I was elected to Rotary as an honorary Rotarian. And there's many, many things that happened. Some of them very amusing that I could relate, but I won't take the time on that.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you, Bob. And as you could tell, Bob, one of Bob's claims to fame is he's the greatest storyteller you've ever heard. As a young man, I can remember going to Rotary for reasons that I don't really remember, but once in a while I'd be invited to go to Rotary, and Bob would always have these terrific, wonderful yarns and stories and tales to tell that were very, very interesting and captivating and very humorous. He was a very, very, very warm, charming guy. How about you, Dave? Are you warm and charming or just smart?
Bob is a tough act to follow.
Yes.
I came to Lowell the year after Engelhire did, and I came in a basket. I came home with lots of hospital, and I don't remember much after that for a while. But one of the earliest recollections I have is my mother getting on the telephone, and she would turn the crank, and she would take the receiver off, put it up to her ear, and pretty soon Agnes Perry would answer, and the operator up in the switchboard upstairs where the antique mall is now. And they would visit for a while about community affairs, and she said, give me number 14. And then Bob Hahn would answer at his grocery store. He would order a pound of ground beef or something like that. And a little bit later, Bob would have it delivered to the house. Maybe she ordered more than a pound of beef, I don't know. But whatever she ordered would come in a truck. I guess he had a truck by that time.
We had two delivery systems at that time. Harry Kingley was one. Harry would live down the country. Harry would pick up the groceries to make the delivery on the east side and progress to the west side. And Bert Charles, this was a team of horses, mind you. And then Bert Charles would start to pick up on the west side and come to the east side, which are the last ones. I say there were 8 at the time. And believe it or not, we paid those two delivermen with a horse and rig and so on and so forth, $9 a week. And as I say, clerk hire was $8 a week. And first, when I put in the meat department, Carl Monroe became my cutter for the next 8 years. And I paid Carl $10 a week, and then finally raised him to 12. That was the going rate at the time. And after I bought out F. P. McFarland, he called me up. He had the store. I bought the store to him. He called me up and said, Robert, I'd like to work for you. Well, I said, Mac, what would you do for me? He said, well, I could do the buying for you and the likes of that. Well, when you're selling $8 worth of groceries a day, you certainly need a buyer. I said to Mac, well, Mac, how much would you have to have? Well, he said, I'd have to have $25. Well, that was 3 times what he was paying his clerk. And so that's the spirit of things at that particular time. You can't believe the difference in prices that we experience now.
Back to David. Where were you, David? Oh, you were getting some pound of beef. That's right. Mother ordered a pound of beef.
My roots are quite deep.
Yeah.
All 4 of my grandparents are buried up in Oakwood Cemetery. And 4 of my great-grandparents are in Town Center, where they were some of the pioneers, some of the first settlers of Town Township.
Who were your maternal grandparents, David?
My maternal grandparents, John Nange.
Nange.
Yeah. They came over from Switzerland as children.
Yeah.
He was kind of a lecturer at itinerant minister. I never knew him, of course. He died in 1906. But I don't know, he never had a church, I don't think. He just went and called her. I don't know much about it, really. But the interesting historical thing that turned up not too long ago was that Brian Doyle's house over there in town was originally built by one of my ancestors, one of the first settlers, the McMahons. Peter McMahon built the house. Now I've forgotten it. He was my great-great-grandfather. One of my other recollections of playing along the river when I was a kid. I lived right across from the old high school that's gone now. I used to play down the river by where the showboat is. And it's kind of swampy in there. Frogs hop around in the lily pad. We used to have a puddling ground in there. In the winter, it would freeze over and we'd go ice skating all over the river. I don't think it works that way anymore. Now, we've probably seen to that. Don't get that much ice.
Not the safest.
Yeah.
That's been enough time in there.
Seems like it. Well, that's terrific, and that's a wonderful start. Just exactly what we wanted to hear from all of you. That was wonderful. Now, do you want to move on to any other? Are there any other recollections or things of particular interest that appeals to any of you to recollect and share with us?
Well, you remember our walker from, maybe we wouldn't remember, the A&P store?
No.
I talked with him 25 years ago, or maybe longer ago, that happened. 50 years ago, it was after Bucky was working for him at the store. He was married and had one kid. He get $12 a week. He asked Art for more money. And Art said, well, Bucky, he said, I can't give you a raise. He said, next time the supervisor comes through, we'll see what we can do. So, one day the supervisor came in, and Art introduced him to Bucky, and Bucky said, I could have more money. He said, I've got a wife and a couple of kids, and $12 a week, she's going to do for her. Well, he said, Bucky, how'd you get down here today? Bucky said, I drove down. He said, you can walk. Oh, dear.
Ouch. When would that have been, Ray, in the 40s?
What?
Would that have been in the 40s or 50s?
I don't remember this one.
Yeah.
It was 30s.
Yeah. Was the A&P store?
Yeah, it was right next to G's Hardware.
Yeah. Well, that's...
The A&P store that was down there next to G's Hardware was Clyde and Emma Collar, were the two clerks in there, husband and wife. And they used to, A&P at that time had no perishables, not even oranges or grapes or anything like that. And they'd close the store at noontime, go home to lunch, then come back. And that was typical of the times.
Art used to use his own money to buy eggs from the farmers. That was one way he kept some of the farmers. What they gave him the devil for doing, but then they finally, he quit and their business went down, and so they started buying eggs.
Normally, school started back in those days at 8:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Went until 12 o'clock, and we had an hour off between 12 and 1, and everyone went home, I guess, and then it went from 1 to 3:30.
Right.
And that was it.
I
We used to
remember...
go down to Christensen's and get a very good, healthful meal for 25 cents.
I remember they rang the bell, it was a big like a church bell. And that was the first bell and the second bell, and I lived about a block away, and I'd get up at the first bell, and I'd be in school by the second bell. I'm sorry?
We lived right next to us.
Oh, yeah.
They used to ring the bells for about 5 minutes when they'd ring it. I think I'd get up when the last bell started ringing.
I'm going to tell a story that one of the guys that we invited to come and he couldn't make it was Bruce McMahon. And last year we had what was it, Charlie? Bill, the closing of Birchfield, I guess it was. And they wanted some of the old-time athletes to come, and Bruce McMahon was one of the wonderful old-time athletes around Lowell. So I called Bruce to ask him if he would come down for this closing ceremony, and he didn't feel good. He wasn't sure he could, but he said, Normie, did you realize back in the old days when we had these good teams in the early 30s, he said, I never played on a losing team. I said, yeah, I knew that, Bruce. You guys really had quite a team. He said, but I want you to really hear what I'm saying. We never lost a game. They were not only not a losing team, they, for 3 years, or 4, I'm not sure which, that Bruce played for Lowell High School, they never lost a high school game. Then Bruce went on to Central for just a short time, played a little while at Central Michigan University, and but he didn't finish there and didn't play the whole season. They never lost a game at Central either. So Bruce, pretty unusual experience, never ever played on a losing game. Pretty unusual situation.
To go back to something that was inexpensive, like at the store, well, Chris started with combs for a nickel and sold us some Sundays for a dime. And when we left, it was only 20 cents, and now you can't get them for less than $2. But one of our famous authors, Glendon Swartout, used to spend a lot of time there. And he worked with his father at the bank, didn't you? Swartout. And anyway, when Dr. Hill was collecting his books and different things, he used to call me one time. He said, you know him, will you call him that? And we got his number from the I think, from Grand Rapids. And I called him and got what I wanted. But one Sunday, he called me. It was on a Sunday, I was just going to go get the papers, and I said, gosh, Glendon, let me sit down. And he wanted Dr. Hill's number. And so we were talking, and he just says, well, when Dr. Hill has that display and window, and you take a picture of it. And I said, oh, sure. And he gave me his address, and he said, oh, Ruby, I can just close my eyes and see that store. He says, and cherry cokes for a nickel. He was a multi-millionaire, but that coke for a nickel.
Harold, what was the story about the fellow?
John lives in Sutton Bay, directly across from your mother's old farm.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. I knew they were up there.
I think we had it easier than young mothers, and we have 7 children, so I'm pretty good test taker. Then when we had people coming to the house who talked about Hans deliveries, I would send out laundry, American Laundry, Colonial Bakery came to the door, milk delivery, Barry Lehman's and Zulo, all that stuff that was milk and cream and ice cream, and well, it came to $92 a month anyway for our family, but I think we had lots of things that were easier than what we chase around for now.
And along with that, there's an expression now that's quite popular around the country. It takes up a whole town to raise up a child. And I think all of you have done that. You have all raised me up, and you've raised up Charlie Doyle and Phil Snyder and Phyllis and Gene and
You didn't do too well, did you?
Charlie was one of your big failures. Oh, the WPA days. What a terrible sort this fellow is. This Charlie Doyle was a neighbor of mine, and they lived in a very nice home where the Nazarene Church parking lot is today. Well, the town had contracted with the WPA to put in all nice new sewers around town, and they were tearing up the whole town, putting in a whole new sewer system, and Charlie, being one of the big guys around, and his gang of cutthroats, was Walt and Rodney Croft and Rex Collins, things like that, they decided that these new sewers would make a wonderful place to store a kid. Well, guess who the kid was? These gangsters grabbed me, put me down in the sewer, put the top back on, and left me there. I don't think I was in there very long, but I howled and cried and yelled. I was only about 5 years old or so, 6 years old. Charlie and his gang just took off. Someone finally found me, I don't know who it was, and they got out of the sewer. It wasn't too bad down there. It was all clean and nice, fresh sand, fresh bricks. They weren't functional yet. Oh, dear. I loved you, Charlie.
Back in those days, the Light and Power turned the street lights off at 11:30.
Oh.
And they didn't come back on until the next night when it got dark. That was the same money. Saturday night?
Oh, well, that was a big Saturday night town until the war.
Yeah.
In Sutton's Bay, Norm's grandfather, when he was Sutton's Bay, his grandfather. Somebody during the war, they helped cut down on the power. He turned off every other street light. Well, some of the people who lived right where the light was complained about it, so he turned them all off.
He lost the election. He wasn't. Next year he was not elected mayor.
In the ledger just today, they said that when Frank came in 1894, had the first electric lights. Now, what house would that have been? Right. That's right.
Oh, is that right?
The one that was tore out.
Yeah.
Oh, I wondered, because I wondered too, and I thought, well, gee, I got some
My
pictures
dad
of
bought it
houses,
from
but
Frank
not
King.
his.
And then what Frank King right after he married.
What year was that?
1884. Any other comments that any of you want to share? Or I know you've got a bazillion of them, but we are time constrained here. Any special memories or stories that you want to share with us?
Back in the mid-1800s, the Lowell Cutter Factory was the biggest industry in Lowell by far. And there were the three Peckham boys, Gurney Peckham, or Al Gurnan Peckham was my wife's father. And then there was Carl and Gage in the company. And back about 1890, they built the first building where the Superior Furniture is now. The first building that was erected there was built at that time, and they built the first wooden bodies for the Buick automobile outfit. And there was a man by the name of Fisher associated with them, and Gurney Peckham died, my wife's father died in 1912. And the two surviving Peckham boys said, well, there's no future in the automobile business. And so a man by the name of Fisher was associated with them, and he went over to Flint and became Fisher Body.
Literally, the Fisher Body Works, which became one of the biggest factories in the world, or companies in the world, literally had its beginnings right here in Lowell at the Lowell Cutter Factory.
My wife's dad, his name was Al Gurnan, they called him Gurney. That's how my son came by his name. But he would make one trip up through New York State and Vermont and Connecticut and Maine and sell a year's output of cutters. And as I say, the cutter factory at that time was the biggest industry in Lowell and had the most employees.
Very fresh.
And part of it was down behind the bank now, wasn't there? Some along,
there was a big building down there, a real building.
Yeah, there was. We've got a picture of it.
Yeah.
That, I meant to bring some of my pictures. You don't. Ruby probably has one there of it. But, yeah, it was a big factory and big cutter works. Well, panel, I think. Go ahead.
I remember Carl Peckham he used to be on our bank board, and he went to California one year. And when he came back, he said, you know, I'm going to, when I die, I'm going to be buried in California. And so somebody said, well, why California? Well, he said, you can buy a funeral in California for $100. That's where I'm going when I
Jack, his son, was the last one when he was there in California.
I'd like to have Ray verify a story that I heard about the Borgesons. This is up in Sutton Bay, and if you've ever been up in Sutton Bay, you know in the spring of the time of the year there are lots of leaks. Now, I don't know if you know what leaks are or not. Well, anyway, there's a lot of leaks there, and of course the cows got out in the pasture there, and they'd eat the leeks, and it would taint the butter. And I heard that Norm's predecessors up there, or Ray Form's predecessors up there, sold a lot of leaky butter, and they very shortly after that moved to Lowell.
Worked at a grocery there called the Company Store. And he said they always saved the leaky butter, so when a boat came in, you'd get a load of lumber.
Sold it to the sailors that were leaving. Well, panel, thank you very much, and I think we'll now turn the...
It's labeled Cough Creek.
Cough Creek there was a Cough Lumber Company, and I think the
Well,
Cough...
that ran right through your place, didn't it, Ellen? Yeah.
No, it is Cough, yeah. K-O-P-F.
Deanie Bangs.
Yeah.
Bangs.
But wasn't there furniture factory on South
Yeah. And Bangs, your Bangs.
Well, that's a good one to research. Dorothy, why don't you come up next year? You can be on the panel and tell us where Tuckertown is.
Thank you.
Well, that was after World War II. Did you hear the question, Bob?
No.
When did Hans Hardware become a hardware? That used to be the price, right? Wasn't it?
I went into business in 1923, and that hardware at that time was an old hardware then. And Armstrong was one of the owners of that hardware at that time. And then we bought the hardware from Gerald Armstrong, who was the son of the father that had the hardware store. And Gurney was in there 41 years.
Didn't he initially have a partner, Bob?
Yeah, that's a sad story.
Oh, is it? His partner was Story. Where's Story?
That was Price right there.
That's right.
Yeah, Price right. Price right there.
That's right. Gerald.
Yeah, that was Armstrong called him Price, right? Yeah.
Do any of you remember George W. Harris? He was a minister, and I'm trying to track him down for purposes of his sister was a very famous poet in Oklahoma. And I have much of her work now, but I haven't been able to track the family down.
Before my day. He was a Methodist preacher. And he, Reverend Harris was there, I would say in the 18th, maybe in the teens, early 20s.
I think he died in 1920.
Yeah, I think he was there.
That's a different Harris. Reverend Harris, Methodist, he married my parents in 1920.
Oh, did he?
And we lived for a long time after that. That was H.H. Harris.
Wasn't that Merrill and then Harris going backwards, David?
No, Merrill was after. I remember.
Yeah, Merrill going backwards.
Yeah,
Merrill and then Harris.
And Nixon.
Yeah, Nixon.
When I was just a little boy.
Any other questions for our panel of experts? Yes, yes.
Maybe this
Please.
is for Bob. Bob, were you in business when Clint Hodges had his store?
When I went into business, there were 8 independent merchants. I was on the corner there. Borgerson was on the place where, on the next corner down there. Then in the middle of the block, Van Dyke had a grocery store. And on the corner where the saloon is now, George Shaw had a grocery store there. And across the street, in the old cement block building over on the riverbank there, a man by the name of White had a grocery store there. And the first chain store that came to Lowell was C. Thomas from Grand Rapids. And he had only 4 or 5 stores. And then he sold out to Kroger, and that was Kroger's advent to the town of Lowell, and even to the, I guess, to the state of Michigan, as far as that's concerned. And as I say, at the end of 20 years, well, Les Weaver and I were the only 2 survivors on that, because of the advent of the chain stores.
I think maybe we missed the question. Was it Hodges that you
Yeah,
wanted?
Clint Hodges.
Clint Hodges. Clint Hodges succeeded Van Dyke.
Ah.
And there was a man in there with a name of Anderson for a while, too.
Van Dyke bought Anderson.
Yeah.
Clint Hodges was right next to,
Martin Houseman.
Oh, Mark Hausman had a meat market.
Yeah.
but Clint Hodges was right next to Dave's store.
Who?
To Dave Coons, he said.
Yeah.
They lived, see, the east, just the first one east of it. He had a grocery store in there.
What I was wondering about is that I heard that that store, Cousins, was originally a store where the Hudsons, the person that started Hudson's, lived and worked there. Is that really true?
I've heard those kind of
It's in
stories.
the book,
I think
and I'm
Phil
just
Snyder
wondering
really
if-
knows the right answer.
That's been a family story of my family. J.L. Hudson originally had a store in Lowell, and it was where my family store was, but it's in the same block. It's pretty vague. But I think J.L. Hudson originally in Fort Huron, they had a branch in Lowell. And later they consolidated it all in Detroit.
So, but his store was where Coons clothing store?
That was the family. Very short time. My dad was only 14, I think, when he started the business.
Yeah.
His older brother and his father started it. So it's a little bit vague.
Did we answer the question about Hans Hardware? That was Bob's son. It was Gurney. And Gurney and Ware Story, I think, started the business. Then Gurney finished. Any other questions? Yes.
I would be interested in meeting with anybody afterwards that knows anything about John S. Hooker, because Angelina was my grandmother's aunt. Angelina.
Angie Hooker.
Angie Hooker. Angelina Hooker. The lady, it was her grandmother?
Hooker that came.
Great. Yeah. She'd like to talk with anyone.
She was a showboat queen, I'm not showboat, Centennial queen.
Oh.
She lived on Riverside Drive, right next to Agnes
What street would that be?
John Hooker lived on Riverside Drive, about the 4th block up.
That's where Angie Hooker.
Oh, yeah. Did you get that, Miss? Yeah. The home is still there. Nice little home.
I think Angie Hooker also was the first graduate. There were 2 people that were in the first graduating class of Lowell High School. And Angie Hooker was one, and the other one was a Hine, H-I-N-E. It was Frank and I think Angie Hooker.
My grandmother gave me some information that said that the Hooker family started the mill that became the mill that's still here, the King Milling. Is that true?
Right, that's correct. We can give you lots of history on hookers, there's no problem there. No problem there.
I know my friend said, are there any more hookers in Lowell? And I didn't like the way that sounded.
Yes.
J.S. Hooker has something to do with the school too.
C.S. Hooker, he built the first.
Cyprian, that was his father, John.
John Hooker's father built the first school.
It said that he had the first trading post when he bought his land from Rex Robinson.
That's right. C.S. Hooker had about 100 acres on the west side of the river. He owned from Main Street to Foreman, from Riverside Drive to Amity. That whole section, which would be basically the west side, the incorporated side of the city of Lowell. And then that was sold about 1855. That portion, the east side was always called Dansville.
Okay.
And then along in that period, it became a post office was established in Lowell, and then when that was established, then Lowell became, really that name caught and became Lowell. Dansville then sort of went on the wayside. It
Was that from Daniel Marsack?
Dansville from Daniel Marsack.
Any other questions? Yes.
Denny's tourist rentals down in town used to previously called the Elms, and they had a postcard from there back when the phone number was 21.
Yeah.
And sported inner spring mattresses and hot and cold running water. And I was just wondering if anyone knew how that had gotten started. I saw Sylvia had shown me some books with programs and stated
Yeah.
and different people on the computer.
Ann might know.
I couldn't hear the question very well. I know she was referring to the elms. What was it you wanted to know?
How it actually got started, how long ago, there's no, I tried to find when it was built, and the 1900s is all.
It was a very old house when my sister and her family moved in. Denny, you and Denny.
Perkins lived there.
Perkins, yeah. Perkins, who once were in Bob Hahn's store. The Perkins Grocery, is that before you or after you, Bob?
Well, that was before Perkins. Yeah.
Well, that house, which became the Elms Tourist Home, was the Perkins house.
Yeah.
When would it have become the Elms, do you think?
When our sister opened up the store.
Oh.
He wants to know.
That was way back in the 30s, wasn't it? In the 30s, wasn't it?
I suppose so. Or 20s.
Or even 20s, yeah, even 20s.
Yeah.
As long as I can
Yeah,
remember.
I would think.
Well, we have a
25.
register book that dates back to 1923, and people are signing in as early as 23.
Yeah.
So, they used actually an old mill register, and they cut it up in pieces and fastened it together.
How far does it go? Up to what? Because I stayed there when I was a kid sometimes. My folks are gone.
It goes up to, I think, up to 55.
Oh, I probably
It's very long. I'll go look in there.
My folks were always, that's part of why I'm so grateful to the town for raising me up. My folks were always gone in business one thing or another, and so I had to eat at the pool room and stay at Denny's and things like that.
Your favorite was Hazel.
Hazel's pool room, yeah, that's right. She was a good cook. Any other questions? Yes?
I'm a newcomer in Lowell. I've been here about 2 months. Covered bridges are my fascination. And when I came to Lowell and I learned about the Fowlsburg Bridge, I went out and took a look at it. And now in my advanced years, I want to make a replica of the bridge. I was fortunate enough to get the blueprints on the reconstruction from the project engineer. But one of the things that I've wondered about since I've been looking at that bridge and studying it, it's all bolted together. Is there any information anywhere as to how they got that bridge across that river? Did they build it on the shore and put it across, or did they build it across the river? Because all those timbers are bolted together. Longest timbers in there are about 22 feet long. And the way those trusses are built on each side, I don't know how they could have built them in place unless they would have had scaffolding or something like that to have done it. And
Well, I think the original one came down and was rebuilt, probably from the plan that you have.
the original bridge at Fowlsburg,
I think so.
it's still there.
It has not come down.
Oh, it has?
Well, they took it down
They took it down.
and to fix it
They,
a couple of times,
there
but
was
they built it
1901.
right back again.
1901, there was some work done on it, and again in 1945.
But they would mark it and put it back. I had an uncle that went off on that bridge on the ice and was killed. It was a slave. And that, I think, was in.
Those patented trusses, the way they're built, how they got that across the river.
Oh, it was the late 1830s.
1871, the bridge was
Was that the
built.
first? Yeah, that was the first one.
That was the first bridge in this area.
Have you contacted Priscilla Lusfire? Yes, I have. If she doesn't know it, it probably isn't known.
The bridge was in 1904. But how much, how they got that across, I have no idea.
It's a 100-foot span, and that's an awful long span, and there's a lot of timber to get across there. If they built it on the shore and put it across, it would have taken quite a gantry to bring it across. They had to build the trusses.
Maybe you did.
When they did it, when it was frozen?
Put it across, both sides of them, it had to been built together the way it's constructed. Otherwise, how would they held it up, you know? It's all boulder.
Could they put up pilings and then take the pilings down?
Well, they could have, I imagine.
Quite shallow.
Yeah.
The river is
River.
Yeah.
I'm going to build a replica. I'm going to start off tomorrow, start cutting out some pieces.
Where are you gonna put it?
I'm going to retain ownership, but it will be on loan.
Another one you ought to build is what is it called? The Beasley Bridge?
Bixby.
Bixby Bridge? Yeah, that was a covered bridge also. Was that
Right north of town.
right? Was that a toll bridge at one time, you know?
I
Almost like something about a toll bridge.
It sure went on before they pulled it down.
Where was that?
It's right out there by Skirville. You know, that first bridge, there's two of them, the original.
On Burroughs?
First
Not Burroughs?
one. No, right on, what is it called?
These are on Burris Road?
No.
Well, the way the Fallisburg Bridge was built, it's built the same construction as White's Bridge.
Yeah.
And White had a patent on that construction.
Have you seen the one in Frankenmuth done recently? And I thought that was done at 22.
What's that?
Frankenmuth, I've seen the bridge they
Well,
built.
that's a George Bridge that's been built there.
But I thought it was built on the basis of the old
There's that
method.
Bixby now.
I think it's a different type. It's a big construction, because it has an art to it.
Is that where the crab house was too, Ruby?
Yeah, it was the first bridge. There's two right there, there's one right almost in front of Skirville, and then one around in the bend.
Okay, the crab house was on the second bridge.
Yeah, right there.
So we have a big picture of this down to the Fairless.
Oh, I think so.
There's one in the city offices of City Hall. Nice one, yeah. Any other questions? Yes,
What was
Dave.
the bridge that was up by the Boy Scout cabin? It went across there.
That was a dam, I think, Dave.
Was it a dam?
They dammed that right in there sometime.
There's a lot of, the abutments are there on the west side yet.
Yeah.
Got nothing on the
And
right
you
side
can
except
see
rocks.
the remains of must have been an earthen dam, I guess. I don't know anything about it. Wood. That's not is that the one in these pictures? I don't think so, is it, Dave? These are copies of the pictures that you gave us? I think this is the 9 Mile Dam, wasn't it?
That was a private company. That was not done wrong. Dallas Church up
Mrs. Borgerson, you remember that house then was a place where students would come and stay when they went to school. My mother came down, so when she stayed at Denny's during the week, and then she went home on the train for the weekend.
She had several girls that stayed there while they were going to high school.
That was in the end.
She had done that also. She had stayed in a home.
Other way around, yeah. Any other questions? Good, Jim.
Does anyone know anything about the Lowell woolen mill, where they were located?
Were there photography studios way back then in Lowell?
Yes, yes, yeah.
I have some great grandparents and they're seeing different names of chapel.
I'm not familiar with it, I've never paid much attention, but we've got lots of photographs with names of photographers on it.
Didn't you tell about the photographer that took a picture of that? He was behind that?
That was Issue Avery's
Anyone else? Yes, Marge.
I'd like to have Mr. Engelhire tell about the hermits, the hermit that lived up
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Story about that. Anybody else who knows about it?
Did you hear the question, Harold? Marge, Lowell was blessed or cursed or entertained by a wonderful old hermit, Jim Burnett, is my recollection of him, and Charlie and many others are familiar with it. But Jim Burnett, and he was a hopeless hermit, and Harold Engelhire were best pals. And Harold can tell you probably everything you ever wanted to know about Jim Burnett. Go ahead, Harold.
Well, my wife and I used to go up the river, go hiking, and because one of the stops was always at Jim Burnett's. He was, of course, he was a hermit, and the story is that he was in love with a girl, and she turned him down, and so he decided to live up there in a shack. He had a display of, all he did was fishing, and he had a display of all the fish heads that he had caught in the river, and he was a fellow that always honored his obligations, and he worked for a fellow that was a farmer who lived east of the river, and he had to go over the hills to get over there, and he would borrow some money from him if he ran out of food, and so this fellow, he was a farmer, and so Jim Burnett, when we got out of money, he'd go and he'd see him, and he would never ask for more than $3 because he didn't want to be obligated to repay it. But he was always honest and paid it, and he had to work it out. So he used to go up there, and so when Jim Denton, he wouldn't loan him the $3, but he said, "I'll give you $10. I don't want to be bothered with $3." So he would stand there and just wait for Jim, and so when Jim got ready to work, he had his team there, and he would say to him, "Now I've got to go to work," and he'd say, "Good up." And so then Jim would say, "Okay, give me the $10." And he always honored that and paid it back.
Tell the story about Jim. Jim, was he a veteran and he got a pension or script money from the government or something, but one time he got real money. He used to give the script money to Bob Hahn, but when he got the real money, he thought he took it someplace. What was that story?
Money from something.
Charlie, do you know that story?
Bob knows it. Bob knows
We
it.
didn't have such a thing as relief at the time. And the township supervisor was the only source for anybody to go and get anything that had to have it that needed it. So the first thing they did, Louis Eider came to town. He was township supervisor. And he said to me, when I I carried people as much as $300, that was a lot of money way back then, as much as $300 before I cut them off. Then I'd have to send them up to Lou Yider. So Lou said, well, Bob, he says, I just came in from the farm. He said, we had our meat, we had our poultry, we had our butter, and we had practically everything. He said, I don't know what it costs to live in town yet. Well, I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll have them make, my customers, I'll have them make out a list. And I said, I'll send it up to you, and you okay. And I said, if you see anything that you think is out not right, I said, call me up. I know their buying habits. So that's the way we started out on that deal with the township, the only source of relief that we had. And at that particular time, people would buy, bread was only 5 cents a loaf. But anybody that was going to have a month's relief would get maybe 20 loaves of bread. And so Lou would cut that off and put on a sack of flour. Now at that time you could get a 24.5-pound bag of flour from King Milling Company for 65 cents. So it was much cheaper of course, to have a sack of flour than was given the bread. Well then, after that he went to a token system and issued so many tokens to the people that were qualified for it. And then he discontinued that and gave cash. And after he started giving cash, Jim Burnett qualified for that, of course. And Jim got his cash, and I didn't see him anymore for a while. I met Jim on the street one day, and I said, Jim, I said, you don't come in anymore. Well, he was going down to the A&P at the end of the block there and buying his groceries. And he said, well, Robert, I didn't know you could take money. We had a trucker that came out here from Grand Rapids that brought the surplus stuff out here. They'd have bushels of oranges and bushels of grapefruit, and dried beans and dried peas, and butter. Butter was a commodity at the time that the government had so much they didn't know what to do with it. And Jim would get his pound of butter and bring it over to my store and trade it for a pound of lard. He didn't like it waste of butter.
A couple of facts about the old Lowell Lumber and Coal Company I might tell you people. First of all, our telephone number was 12. So we had one of the first ones there. And Nita and I didn't have a telephone for all the time I taught music here and while I was in the lumber business until I went into the service. So it wasn't until 1940, what is it, 43, 45, when we got a telephone.
After he was gone 6 months.
But the basement of the old Lowell Lumber and Coal Company, which is now the Jice Manufacturing, J-I-C-E, which probably none of you people know much about. They make pharmaceutical products for animals, and they have bought the property and they kept it up and remodeled it. Looks very nice now. But in the basement of that building was the first generating plant of electricity for the city of Lowell. Also, where that building is now, and we used to use it, was the old Hastings to Saginaw depot. And it was a small little building up on stilts with hand-split laths. In the old times, they used to chop down a very fine thin piece of material, and then they take their hatchet and go into it and spread it and nail it, and that's what they used for their putting their lath and plaster on the lath. But that was the Hastings to Saginaw Railroad, and the interesting thing is that the railroad never got to Hastings. It got as far as Freeport, and if you look today, you can see the old grade line for about 1 or 2 miles south of Freeport, going towards Hastings. And Frank White, who lived there, very distinctly remembered the inaugural of the Hastings to Saginaw Railroad, which took place in the old depot there at the old lumber company.
Any other questions? Yes.
Where did Jim Burnett live?
Up in the hills.
Yeah, up in the hills. That's about it.
Well, I'll tell you exactly where it is.
He was on the riverbank.
You go up to the scout cabin, and you start going right along the riverbank there, and you go up to Devil's Peak that way too. That's a nice climb up there. And you get up there and you go down the other side. Just keep walking. You can see where his cabin sat. It's still, it's leveled off there. Elmer Lawyer and I went up there about 2 years ago, and the beavers had dropped a lot of trees around, but you can still see where that cabin sat. And that's what, when we went up there, Elmer said, you know, nobody's ever done anything for Jim, and he's got an unmarked grave. Why don't we get to work on this? And that's when we went to Judd, and Judd gave us a stone, and we had the service before him and everything else. We had the people come back. We had a lot of the Thor girls came back. The Hills were there. Everybody that used to know Jim Burnett came back to those services. It was a real. Bob was there.
Do you know where he means now? Do you know where the scout? Yeah.
It's about halfway between the Boy Scout cabin and the dam, and the, no, not Felsburg, the dam out there on.
The little power dam.
Little power dam.
First one you would come to is if you went up Riverside Drive on your right.
Halfway.
But Bob was mentioning that he would get his money once a month. And he would always come in the store, and going back to Christians again, and it was about the first time Chris had remodeled, and he made the counter longer. And he'd go to the furthest seat, and plunk that bag down on that, and he'd order a chocolate nut sundae. And he'd sit there for that dime, and he enjoyed it. And he'd always do it just about the time school would be out, around 3:30. And invariably, he had a crowd of boys around him listening to all his old stories. And first they used to kind of tease him to get him started, but after he got started, oh, he could tell Indian tales. And really, he was, I don't know, an old codger, maybe that's the word.
Another old character we could probably do a whole night on it was Walt Zurby. He was kind of a crazy old character around town. In fact, everybody that ever saw him has got a story to tell about him.
I was going to Grand Rapids one Saturday morning, and the roads were icy. Down here was a little park about halfway through here. There was 3 or 4 cars stopped there, so I stopped. Walt had a Dodge sedan, he tipped it over. He skidded on the ice and tipped over right in the middle of the road. Harvey Haber was with me. And Harvey said, Walt, where's Jenny? Well, he said, she's still in the car.
They tell that when times were very difficult, you know. Walt, on a Saturday night, would take a big canvas and cut a hole in the canvas. He'd let people throw an egg at him for a nickel. Any other questions?
When was the button factory started?
Harold might know. Do you know about the button factory, Harold?
I don't know when it was started, but it was during the time there that they used to get shells out of the river.
Yeah.
They used to get a lot of shells out of Grand River, and so that's when Gus Levy was the fellow that had that factory. He had a button factory there, and he was in there for many years. And then finally, of course, they didn't use buttons anymore. So those were nice buttons.
Yeah, I think it lasted until around 1940, but when it started, I don't know.
It was after 40.
Yeah. We have some shells. Elmer Lawyer brought me a whole bag full of shells that somebody dug up. All the buttons punched out of the clam shells. You know, there'd be 30 or 40 holes in the clam shell where they punched the buttons out, made beautiful buttons. Yeah. Anyone else?
It used to be commonplace for us to chalk specials on the window of the store.
Yeah.
With a white chalk and a brush, you'd chalk up various things. And on one occasion, Walt Zurby had a son show up here all at once that was a sign painter. So Walt became a sign painter. Walt was an oddball, if there was one. He could ride a bicycle slower than anybody ever knew of, keep his balance. And so he put a sign on the window of Louis Root's restaurant. And I saw the sign there, and so I went to Louis and I said, I suppose you could fill the small gut for a nickel. He says, what do you mean? Well, I said, come out and take a look. And Walt Zurby had chalked the sign up on the window and said, homemade vegetable soup, large bowl, 10 cents. of dessert. Wilderness Festival for 35 cents. A good meal.
Well, it's 9 o'clock, and I think we've all had a good time, and we have enjoyed the panel very much. Same panel or different panel or whatever, maybe once or twice a year. It'd be very, very nice to reminisce. Charlie and Phil could probably make a very interesting panel. Well, thank you all very much for coming. Back to Phil.
Do you remember that back in the early 60s, the Y had meetings with Frank Mcmahon and a whole batch of them, and those were put on tape. And Barb Davis, was the secretary then, and she wasn't able to recall what happened to those, but those certainly belong in your archive.
Yes.
And I don't know if the Y could dig them out for you, or maybe Barb could probably might be able to come up with the. But those certainly belong in your.
Unfortunately, tape decays, as you may or may not know. Tape loses its surface of some kind. I've got some old tapes that you put on and nothing comes out. It's just...
She may have made typewritten copies.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'll ask her.
But they did get into the Lowell Ledger periodically, so there'd be stories, particularly in
Oh, it'd be terrific. Yeah. Ivan, who was probably are you chairman of the cable board, Ivan? Anyway, chairman of the cable board and chief operator. As you can see, he's up there. He's recording this whole thing for us, and he'll probably run it every day. I want to
We'll see whether we got a picture.
Yeah. Okay. You want to edit it first? Yeah, Dorothy.
I have some delineator and a Bodie's book that came out of, and I have lots of other things that came out of the walls of our house. Our house is 1863, and if anyone's interested in looking at those, and
If you are involved in old houses, you always want to look. They used to use that stuff for insulation. In fact, anything they had in the walls of a house, I'm a stamp collector, valuable stamps and letters have come out of walls and things like that to help keep out the cold.
I'd like to just have everyone sign their name as they leave.
Oh, terrific.
And we'll keep track of who was here for this first panel.
Oh, that's
okay?
Yeah.
I'll put it up here at the door.
Dorothy's our dynamite secretary. She won't miss a trick. Well done, Dorothy. Well, thank you all for coming, and we'll try to do this again. Bigger and better than ever.
Charlie, wait a minute, wait.
The Lowell Area Historical Museum is proud to sponsor community oral history interviews. The Lowell Area Historical Museum educates, enriches, and inspires our community and visitors through the preservation and presentation of Lowell area history. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.